Hi there, thanks for visiting. My name is Simon Williams, and I'm a principal with Edmonton Public Schools. This video is called Amiskwaciy-wâskahikan, Mapping Indigenous Edmonton, and it's the first of two videos that I'm posting as my act of reconciliation. This presentation was inspired by my wife and completed with the support of Jeremy Albert from the Sweetgrass First Nation in Saskatchewan. Wherever possible, I've incorporated research and consulted with members of the Indigenous community. But where there are omissions or errors, they are mine alone. This presentation is a mapping project that I developed in order to reintroduce us to the Edmonton area and explore how the community that we live in developed, as well as begin to consider the impact of colonization upon Indigenous people. I'm non-Indigenous. My family moved here from England in 1976, and so I'm a beneficiary of Treaty 6 and of the Papa's Chase land surrender. In the time since I've been on this land, I've seen the area grow and change as our community develops, and this has caused me to wonder what the land used to look like and what it will look like in future generations. The aim of the project is to promote a re-examination of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people on the land. This is a painting that I did of the downtown area with a little bit of artistic license. As I travel around the city, this is generally what it sounds like and looks like to me. In this painting, I've included the North Saskatchewan River and the River Valley. You can see the high-level bridge and the Legislative Building on the right-hand side. But our city has only looked like this for a very short period of time. So what did it look like before? This is a painting by Paul Kane, a celebrated artist who visited the Edmonton area in 1849, and he painted what that same location looked like during the days of the fur trade. He saw the same river and the high river banks. Where the Ledge building now sits, he saw Fort Edmonton with its palisade walls and the HBC flag flying above. There were First Nations camped on the flats. You can see the missionary cross on the upper right, and a traveling route bringing people to the fort to trade. But the fur trade was only for a short period of time also. So what did it look like before then? This is a painting of what I imagine the area looked like prior to contact, and what I think it may have sounded like. I know that Indigenous people were here long before contact, but I don't know when they began to live on this land, or why they came to this particular area. What are the features of this area that made it a desirable location? Although Edmonton has a large Indigenous population, I don't believe that many people see this as an Indigenous community. There are some legacies that exist in place names that seem to be Indigenous, but what do they mean? And what do I need to know in order to better understand our community and our relationships? This is a digital version of my original painted map. In this, I've included geographical features that were shaped by glaciers and erosion over time. So you can see the rivers, the creeks, lakes, and some hills that I've tried to represent. On a European map, we would use a compass rose to denote direction, but I wanted to show Indigenous ways of knowing. So instead, I've included plants and medicines. In the east, where the sun rises, I've placed tobacco. This is tobacco used in ceremony, a gift back to the land, or a reciprocal agreement when knowledge is shared. The south is represented with cedar, which is used to usher in positive energy, to carry prayers to the Creator, and to cleanse. The west is represented by sage, or amiskwaciy-wâskahikan. Pasqua is a prefix meaning prairie. Sage is used for meditation, smudging, purification of spirit, and dwelling. The north is represented by sweetgrass. This sweetgrass is braided into three sections, representing the mind, the body, and the soul. Sweetgrass is used in smudges, healing, or talking circles because of its healing effect. The map also features animals, which I chose for reasons of particular significance that we'll explore during the presentation. Sometimes we forget that we also are animals, and so I've included these paths created by Indigenous people long before contact. These paths show traditional traveling routes and trade routes that crisscrossed where our community now lies, and who would have brought together Indigenous people to engage in ceremony and exchange goods. That I had was just how long had people lived in this area? Well, archaeological sites belonging to Indigenous people show that people were living here in this area at least 8,000 years ago. It's difficult to get a sense of just how long ago that was, so in the next video, I'll include a timeline to help illustrate this. Although our city grew up very quickly and much of the area was taken over rapidly by development, archaeological sites can be found in three general areas. The first is along the river and the high river terraces and the creeks that feed into the river. In these areas, there would have been easy access to water for transportation, cooking, and drinking. The next area was east of Edmonton, in the Strathcona area near a series of lakes, including the Cooking Lakes. And finally, on some special hills called cames that were created by glacial activity. Around the world, high ground was favored for inhabitation, and the Edmonton area was no exception to this. We'll begin by exploring the cames that were left behind by retreating glaciers following the Ice Age. Now, since Edmonton is generally very flat, these low-lying hills allow sweeping views of the area, and the slight elevation gives access to the breeze, which helps keep the mosquitoes away in the summer. These cames can be found first in the Southgate area, formerly known as Two Hills, as a result of the hills that are near L.Y. Cairns School and Mount Pleasant School, close to the Lendrum Lake and McKernan Lake. Also, near the refineries at the Strathcona Science Park. Here, near the bend in the river, in the area known as River Bend. And finally, we'll take a look at a came in the McGrath area. The Strathcona Came site, which is located across the river from Rundle Park, was examined by archaeologists like Heinz Pizik and Jack Ives in the early 1980s. Their work shows that this came was first occupied as early as 5,000 years ago, and the artifacts left in the sediment layer show that it was repeatedly used over a long period of time. This is what that area looks like now. What is special about this particular location is there is a plentiful supply of quartzite and chert pebbles that can be found there. These minerals were used for tool manufacture because of the way that they cleave when struck, creating clean edges. People would visit this area, they'd begin to fashion their tools there, leaving behind large flakes of rock, and then they'd go about their business elsewhere, but they would be sure to return again and again to this area. Next, in the River Bend area just behind Earl Buxton School is the Prosser Came, which was discovered by amateur archaeologist Ted Prosser. This is what that came looks like right now. And this is another area that reveals over 5,000 years of occupation. From the top of this came, the view is spectacular, and you can see other cames nearby. From this elevated area, you can see the panoramic view of the surrounding land, and people likely came here to watch for game approaching. The site is located at the beginning of a narrow funnel into River Bend, where, because of the geography of the area, herd animals were more concentrated and abundant. Based upon the arrow and spear points found here, the people who camped on this came were bison hunters. For this reason, I included a bison on the bottom left-hand corner of my map over southwest Edmonton. I also included the Cree name for bison, Pasquamostos, and Cree syllabics. Finally, we visit Rabbit Hill the Hill, which is in the McGrath area. Rabbit Hill, the ski area, being a valley and not a hill at all. When I was a teenager, the hill was covered in vegetation amidst a farmer's field. It looked a lot like this. Over time, developers bought the land and houses were built, and suddenly it began to look more like this. Today, the area is a thriving neighborhood, and yet Rabbit Hill is still the highest point in Edmonton, and the inhabitants continue to enjoy the view that would have brought people here so long ago. The river that passes through our city also provided a geographical boundary, and in a very broad generalization, at the time of contact, the river separated the Cree, the Nehiyawak, on the north of the river from the Blackfoot, or the Niitsitapi, south of the river. Following the signing of the numbered treaties, the Red Deer River is now the new boundary between these nations. The North Saskatchewan River that cuts through our city was an important transportation route and trade route. Anyone who's canoed on the river will understand where it gets its name. The river takes its name from the Cree, amiskwaciy-wâskahikan, meaning a river with a fast or a swift current. And this makes me think of other rivers that I've heard of that end with sippy. And it also makes me think of the town of Swift Current, Saskatchewan. The Cree word for lake is wâskahikan. Many lakes around the Edmonton area have names that are translated or borrowed from Cree. Near St. Albert, we find Big Lake, which became an important area for settlement of a predominantly Métis community. The name Big Lake was translated directly from its Cree name, Wâskahikan. Out towards the west, we find Wabamun Lake, which gets its name from borrowing the Cree term for mirror, wapamun. Next, in the Strathcona area, we have the Cooking Lakes, named for the Cree words for a cooking place. Professor Dwayne Donald at the University of Alberta, when he consulted on this project, indicated that the number of archaeological sites in this area is due to the fact that this was a place of refuge for Indigenous people in the region. They would come here in times of sickness, conflict, or hunger, and would access the plentiful resources that exist there in terms of water, forests, hunting, and fishing. Other water features have significant Cree names as well. Big Lake drains into the Sturgeon River and then into the North Saskatchewan. In Cree, the name for a sturgeon is Nemeu. And so for this reason, I included a sturgeon in the upper left-hand corner of my map. The sturgeon flows past the hamlet of Nemeu, north of the Army base, where students attend Nemeu Primary School and Sturgeon Composite High School. Blackmud Creek is a translation of Kaskatewiyasiki, which explains the name Cascateo, which we see on the Cascateo Reservoir, Cascateo Park, the Cascateo Bus, all in the Blackmud Creek area. Well, that brings us to the end of this first video. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join me next time for our next segment. We'll look at Edmonton from the time of contact onwards. We'll look at the fur trade, prominent Indigenous inhabitants, the signing of treaty, and land surrenders. Many thanks to those who contributed to this project coming together. Thanks.